and Economics to hear a special lecture on the topic Society, Technology and Geopolitics by Shri Samir Saran, President of Observer Research Foundation, India's premier think tank. I request you all to put a big round of applause for Saran. Now I would like to welcome our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Ajit Ranade. Before joining the Institute, Dr. Ranade has been the Group Executive President and Chief Economist with Aditya Birla Group. We welcome you, sir. Sir, I request you please come on the podium and introduce.
Thank you, Vrunda, and I join you all in welcoming Dr. Samir Saran to the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. I want to very briefly introduce him. Dr. Saran is currently the president of possibly India's, not just India's, but one of the world's foremost think tanks called the ORF, or Observer Research Foundation, headquartered in New Delhi, but with offices all over the world, I am told. And in fact, they are running projects, active projects in more than 100 countries. Dr. Saran's research focuses on issues of global governance, climate change, energy policy, technology, media, and India's foreign policy. He is in fact the chief curator, if I may say so, Dr. Saran, about of the high-profile, one of the very, very high-profile conferences called the Raisina Dialogues. I think you have completed 6 years or 7, 8 years of that, and this is a forum where the leaders of most of the world leaders of the great countries, including army, military chiefs, presidents, assemble in one place, and this is running now, as I said, for more than 8 years. It's actually India's flagship event in the world of world diplomacy and geoeconomics and geopolitics. Dr. Saran completed his doctoral studies at Global Sustainability Institute, UK. He holds a master's degree, which is his second master's degree, from the London School of Economics, and a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering. In fact, I know that his career has spanned hardcore, down-to-earth engineering work, projects, execution, and the world of corporate affairs and media and energy, technology policy, renewable. I mean, now of course, and now the world of geopolitics and geoeconomics. I told you about Raisina Dialogue, which is a flagship platform and one of the most prominent events now in the world. And he also is the chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Geopolitics. He has authored several books and he has edited many important publications. He also has a very active and a well followed podcast and a video channel. So please give him a warm welcome. I must say, Dr. Saran has come to Pune after a gap of, 20 or 25 years, and that's a terrible this thing on our part. So once again, I reiterate our request to come to Pune again and more often, and especially to Gokhale Institute as well. I also want to especially acknowledge the presence. Thank you for showing up today, and I would like to especially mention Mr. Siddharth Shiroe, who's here. He's MLA and a prominent leader, Loka Prathinidhi. Thank you, sir, for being here. Please give him a warm welcome. I also want to welcome Mr. Sudhir Mehta, prominent industrialist, and more importantly, a very active champion and a dynamic leader, championing the, Pune's futuristic development trajectory. So he's one of the leaders who has been very active, especially in the last few years and in times like COVID, and planning for Pune's development in infrastructure. So thank you. Please welcome Mr. Sudhir Mehta. And Mr. Manoj Kochhar also, who's here, the prominent leader. Please welcome Mr. Manoj Kochhar. So as you can see, your talk has aroused a lot of curiosity and interest, not just among our students, faculty and staff, but also leaders outside. I want to just quickly say a little bit about the topic today, and then I'll hand it over to our guest. The topic for the day is science, technology, and geopolitics. And of course, this is an interplay, and this is something that Dr. Saran will, of course, articulate, I'm sure, in a very excellent manner. They say that what's happening between the US and China today, this is just my take, sir, with your permission. I know it may be sounding very uninformed, but they say it's the Cold War 2.0, But this Cold War, unlike the earlier Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, is actually a tech war, tech Cold War. So if you, I don't know, if you visited China, not just now, but 20 years ago or 15 years ago, there's no YouTube, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Google, no Gmail. You can't. Just it's been completely shut. You get shut out of that when you visit China. Not now. I'm talking about 20 years ago. So the world, it's as if the world is divided. At least as far as tech is concerned, there's a sinosphere and there is the non-sinosphere. I don't want to call it the USosphere, but so this is the domain of the Cold War, if I can call it that. But of course, now you have developments like fintech, artificial intelligence, and now we of course had the wonderful achievement of Chandrayaan, so space. And all of this has implications for the global geoeconomics and geopolitics. And there is no other expert who can articulate and tell you about what's happening and what is the prognosis, what's going to happen, than Dr. Saran. As I said, he combines his scholarship with actual on the ground feel for what's going on. Uh, they say that he really lives the life of if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. So if it's Thursday, he's in Pune, but we don't know tomorrow he might be in Belgium. So great again, once again, I welcome Dr. Saran for the talk. I just want to tell everybody that he'll give a talk and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So please welcome Dr. Saran.
Hi. Okay, so I had a script, but I'm not going to stick to it. So I'm going to actually not read from a script that my team wanted me to read from. They are petrified about what I might say. So they give me a tightly controlled and edited version that they want me to read. But I thought it might be better to have a free-flowing conversation. And I'm going to place some what might seem random ideas, and then I'll try to connect them and why they are important for this discussion that we are having on actually technology, society, and democracy, and the global politics that is trying to govern it. My big question that I want to pose before all of us is that will digital society survive? In fact, let me be honest here. I'm writing a book, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the idea of that book, and hopefully you will criticize me so that my book will come out better. So you are going to help me script that book. I want to hear from you. So I'm going to place some ideas before you on societies of today in this digital age and geopolitics of today and why we need to be thinking about it. So the first idea really I want to speak about is uh, who are we and our relationship with the territory or the landscape that we live in. Now, there have been a number of authors, fiction, non-fiction, who have literally described in romantic terms the relationship between humans and the landscapes that they inhabit. Some people have described trees as their children and meadows as their home. There have been romantic allusions to this relationship we've had between people and planet, and certainly the territories that they were born in or they resided in. In fact, if we are really honest, we are all tribes that belong to certain territories, geographies, and spaces. We belong to land. In fact, the word nation, is Latin. It is by birth humans from similar spaces. So if you understand the word nation, you understand that birds of feather flock together. Eventually, over millennia and many thousands of years of wars and migrations and droughts and climate disasters, we have aggregated in manners where similar humans reside together. They have largely similar worldviews, largely similar understanding of how they want to govern themselves, largely similar eating habits, cuisines, culture, costume, like the Shashi Tharoor description of the various seas that constitute human existence. But we are similar. When we decide to reside together and have common constitutions or common regimes, please understand there is a compact we are making as people, that there will be a certain framework under which we will live, largely because we could agree to that framework. So nations are born by the relationship between people and the territory, and people who share similar views aggregate and create what we call modern day nation states, right? And I think the persons you should read here are Jared Diamond, Gun, Germs and Steel. You must read this book, and it will tell you the emergence of modern day societies and nations and emergence of industrialization and thereafter. You must read Francis Fukuyama's State Building and how states emerge and evolve and respond. Clash of Civilizations talks about the more gory side of how identities shape worldviews. And of course, Michael Foucault is French, so French exceptionalism comes to the fore, where he argues counterintuitively that people don't give personality to nations, but nation gives personality to people. So he is the contrarian here, where he argues that the sum total of the French people is a different personality from individual French people. And it's a very interesting counter argument, but I think these are all good reading material to understand how, irrespective of how the personality of a nation emerges, people within that certainly subscribe to it. And I think that's the important part, that we are all subscribers to a worldview that allows us to be part of it. I'm just leaving this idea with you, that nation is important because from the time of Magna Carta to Westphalia and to more recently the United Nations Charter, the only interlocutor for what we call a rule-based order is the nation state. It is not you, it is not me, it is India. It is India that is represented by the regime of India, in our case, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the Parliament of India, that speaks for us. So UN does not listen to you and me, UN listens to the state and its elected representative in our case. In China, it is a different system. They listen to the Communist Party of China and their own regime, and so on and so on. So the nation state has always been the single most important unit for any rules-based order that we subscribe to. There is no one else who writes a rules-based order but the nation. This is important to understand. So, while the human rights documents, 3 of those in the UN, speak about protecting individual rights, even that responsibility devolves to the nation state. It is not some international government that is responsible for it. It is the nation state who has the obligation of protecting rights of individuals that reside. So it is a promise made by the state to the international community and to its own people in terms of safeguarding their interests. Nation state is the single most important political unit. So that's the first idea. Second, let's come to this idea. And this is dramatically different. So the first was on nations. Now I'm going to talk about a different emergence. Uh, since we spoke about the rules-based order and we spoke about um, the role of the nation state, let's talk about the role of the non-nation, the non-state actor as we call them. So the first image, this monster here, monopoly, subway franchise, political pull, steel trust, oil trust, and all this. This is a 1899 photograph from a magazine called The Verdict. This one. This is from a magazine called The Verdict. I think it was turn of the century, 1899. It's a good 124-year-old image. And this was a description. This image was a description of the um, uh, Standard Oil phenomena. This is Standard Oil. This was a big oil company that owned everything, Rockefeller, who owned all this, right? So this was a big oil company described in the magazine as this monster. By 1912, this monster was no longer there. In 13 years, he had been dismembered. The monster had been dismembered. It had been broken up. Its monopolistic practices had been taken care of by public opinion, by regulatory action, and by the elected representative of that country, United States of America. They had pulled down this big monster because he had undue control, undue influence on the lives of people, the choices of people, and the agency of people. He was fundamentally, Standard Oil was fundamentally contradicting the Constitution of the United States that promised choice, agency, freedom, and liberty to its people, and regulatory action dismembered Standard Oil. More recently, this is I think, 2018 photograph from The Economist. 4 monsters. The what monsters? Sorry. There is a clicker. Did I press something?
It may be a typo.
Oh, it's a touch. Oh, sorry. That's right. I should not touch. Okay, so this is the more recent photograph, 5 years old, from The Economist, where they pretty much described Amazon, Facebook, Google as these terrible monsters stomping down on civilization, on human beings, on cities, controlling much more than Standard Oil did, by the way. Standard Oil only controlled your transportation and oil. They decide what you eat, who you date, how you work, who you vote for. In fact, who you elect. Their influence on our lives is far bigger than what Standard Oil exerted in 1899. It's 2018, this image. So the question before all of us is, by 2031, would we have dismembered these companies? That's the regulatory challenge. It took 13 years last time around. Can we do it in 13 years is one question. Is 13 years fast enough? Or would we, because of the speed of tech and the velocity of change and the proliferation of digital all over society, is 13 years going to be too long a time? Are we going to be over? Society as we know it is going to be in shambles. Are we going to be polarized and hateful and divided? And the benefits of technology, the lifting up of billions and millions of people through technology, through fintech and through UPI and everything that we celebrate today, is it going to be undone because of the challenges and the negatives and the harms that technology poses? Would we be less human in 13 years' time? Would we even care about being human in 13 years' time? Humanity as we describe it. I think that's a big question for all of us to think about. Now, let's put this phenomena on a world map. All these companies described in The Economist come from one geography, the United States of America. These companies perhaps can be brought down by regulatory action in the US. They perhaps are answerable to the Congress and they go and respond to questions that the Congress poses from time to time. They are summoned to the Capitol Hill and they have to respond to them. When our parliament calls them, they don't. They said they're India Rep, and they say that India Rep says actually that's a different company, that belongs to someone else. We are a different operation here. So the second challenge before us is that not only do they have huge sway over our daily lives, they are also not either responsive to our parliament, our constitution, or our laws. They are extrajudicial actors in India. So now can a country which has such actors controlling its in every process from business to politics to romance and culture and creativity, can a country have these actors that do not respond to the laws of the land, to its constitution, to its parliament, and to its people, to the communities that are increasingly dependent on them? And I think that's the big puzzle, that how can they be made responsive to the localities that they serve? You don't want them to go away because there are lots of goods, like I was just mentioning. You have benefits that flow, connectivity that results. It's really positive. But having them unaccountable is dangerous. Any unaccountable actor in a system like ours, in largely free and liberal and open societies, can run amok. So that's the first poser, that monopolies and monopolies not accountable to you. How should we respond to them? And that's become one of the biggest geopolitical flashpoints of our time. Even friendly countries can't agree. The EU and the US can't agree. The US and India can't agree. And US and Europe, and India and EU also cannot agree. Forget about China. I'm saying, of course, we can't agree with China. And everyone disagrees with China, right? There is a ABC club. It's called Anybody But China Club. So obviously, no one agrees with China other than some who are terribly dependent on them. But even in those who don't agree with China, there is no agreement bilaterally on how do we manage these tech giants coming out of California. And by the way, think about it. Going ahead, at some point, when our platforms are prolific everywhere else in the world, there is a cautionary note here. Can we make sure that when we export UPIs and the DPI, the digital public infrastructure that we are promoting, can we do it in a manner that is culturally sensitive, responsive to local laws and regulations, and commensurate with the capabilities and competence of the geographies that they belong to? So there's also a cautionary. So how you engage on these matters has become the reason for what people today are basically calling the Chinese firewall. The Chinese didn't want these companies in their society, so they kept them out, the Chinese firewall. And now the Americans don't want Chinese hardware and Chinese services in their geography, or even Indians don't want it, by the way. So we don't want them in our geography, so we are decoupling from them. So you are seeing essentially now a technology-induced Cold War, as Dr. Ranade mentioned, playing out without necessarily labeling it as such. So we are answering this big question of our times, that how do you make tech accountable to localities? Now there's a third issue, and this comes down to the individual. So we started with the nation, now I'm coming down to the individual. There is a very famous scholar, Lawrence Lessig, He had once said, code is law. Right? Let me try and explain that to you. So we all used to, when I was growing up, I used to buy famous five. There were books, children investigators used to buy those books. They used to have a series that used to come out in 1980s India. We didn't have too much disposable income, so every child would buy one, and then we would exchange books. So we would read them, then we would give it to the neighbor, and neighbor would give me his, and then he would give me the next one, and we would have read the entire series by buying one book. We would have, and by the way, that was fair use exception, where if we were not selling it and not making money out of it, we were allowed to lend it and borrow it from people. Sometimes we also did garage sales and sold it for 1 rupee at the end of the summer holiday. We used to, get some pocket money. We also used to use some of the images from within the book for our summer assignments. We should copy them and draw them and trace them and do that. This was fair use exception of your ownership of that book. Now buy a digital book and try to lend it to someone. No law prevents you from lending your digital book, but one thing does, that is the code. The coder who has designed the digital book does not allow you to even take a printout of the book. You cannot lend it, you cannot share it, you cannot copy from it, you cannot print out. So there is no law that prevents you from doing it, but the code that has decided the nature of the e-book prevents you from doing it. So code has become law. Today you'll have to go to the court and take a court order to allow you to share that e-book. Earlier, they had to go to the court and prove that you were guilty of violation of copyright and then penalized. And this is very important. But this coding is now no longer just law. Coders also decide which person comes in your dating app first. They decide who you should go out for a date with. They decide which restaurant you should take your date out to. They also decide the car you should be traveling to the date, the Uber that comes and picks you up. So coders are today not only the law, but they are also Seema auntie. They are also your bhaiya on the auto rickshaw who used to take you. They become everything. This is important. And do you want that to be the state of your agency or the limitation that poses to your agency? So technology is changing our everyday existence. So now we move from the nation state to our relationship with technology and rethinking where do we want to go. What I did in my summer holidays, none of you can. You don't want to also, but I'm just saying, none of you can. You cannot lend books to others that you invest in. You buy any book, you can lend it, right? So now you can't do that. You buy an e-book on your Kindle, it is restricted to your Kindle. Now, I think this is an important part. This is the most important part of individuals and where they start, in many ways, emerging as shapers of societies and nations themselves. I started with the definition of a nation, which was a territory, a geographical territory, within which people who generally agreed lived together. Even if they disagreed, they lived together, and there were rules for disagreement under constitutional arrangements. And if you still could not get by, you had dispute resolution mechanisms and courts and other processes to manage peaceful coexistence. But territory was important. You would not accord the same facility to those who resided outside your territory. Intervention was a no-no. In fact, the United Nations Charter particularly focused on non-interference. Technology does not recognize borders. We are interfering in each other's life on a real-time basis all the time. We are commenting on American elections, Americans are commenting on Indian elections, Americans are mobilizing Indians to oppose one candidate, Indians are supporting one candidate in the United States. We are seeing digital mobilizations, digital aggregations create massive mobilizations in each other's internal affairs. So in the analog world, what was called interference in the affairs of each other is become normative in the digital world, where we interfere in the affairs of everyone. In fact, not only interfere, we are now wanting to force conformity on others. We want others to be like us, and we cancel them if they are not like us. Right? So the cancel culture is a digital extremity of, look, I don't want to attend the party because I don't like the people there. We don't go to certain digital spaces, physical spaces. We used to avoid certain gatherings. We did not go to certain functions if we believe that the people there were not to our liking. In digital, we can't do that because everyone is available online, so we mute them, block them, cancel them. And since this can be done so easily, we are also not empathetic and thoughtful. Our first impulse is cancel, rather than let's try and understand the person. Earlier we used to say, why don't you try and understand the person? No, we have no patience. There are so many, we can choose the people we like, which means that we are narrowing, we are in many ways polarizing our own ecosystems that we reside in. We are limiting the people, the kind of different people that we come across. We are putting ourselves into our own silos. No one is caging us. We are doing it on a voluntary basis. That is the power of tech, the power of coding, the power of hashtags, the power of social media. But more than that, I want to place before you 3 ideas. And these are not my ideas. These are by my favorite author, John B. Thompson. He wrote a book on media and modernity. This was on broadcast media when television started beaming into everyone's homes. He was very worried what it would do to our lives. So he came up with 3 concepts. The first was, he says we all today live in mediated historicities. Our histories are fake. Basically what he said was, our own understanding of our histories are fake, they are mediated by information. So people living in a certain geography have greater affinity to histories of those living 10,000 miles away rather than their own histories. So certain actions, for example, certain going-ons in the Middle East evoke passions 5,000 miles away or 7,000 miles away of people who have actually no cultural or historic relationship with that particular region, and vice versa, right? So you have a German protest happening in against nuclear power plants in the early 2000s, and you have Indian fisherwomen also joining those protests and protesting against nuclear power plants. Those the fisherwomen have never seen electricity in their life, but they are protesting against nuclear energy and nuclear power plants. So first of all, we are living in a world where our histories have now been mediated to such an extent that our relationship with the land is fundamentally altered. And I started with the conception of nation state being the place where I had a romance with my land, a link with my land, a story of mine with my land. Today my stories are with someone else's land and someone else's movements. So we have a mediated history. And therefore the second idea is called mediated worldliness. Our place in the world, our role in the world. I know many of you sitting here in Gokhale Institute, which is a premier institute, iconic institute, historic institute. I'm so glad to be here, by the way. I must thank Ajit for the invitation. I'm really happy I've been taking a tour. So, my history is real, and for me, these are important places that I'm visiting. But sitting here in Gokhale Institute, many of you think that in real terms, you live somewhere between Berlin and Paris. That is not the case. Your place in the world is not between Berlin and Paris. Paris, it is 3 hours away from Bombay on a good day. Right? But because of that power of tech, proliferation of information, hashtags and communities that are being created online, we find ourselves more in tune, more aligned with different geographies than our very own. So we choose avocados as our favorite. Because avocado is what my friend in Berlin eats. I'm just giving you an example. That this is what mediated worldliness does, that you start imagining your place in a different location. So that's the second concept. And we can apply this across the board on many ideas. And the third I want to place before you is something called despatialization of time. Now, time and space had a very important relationship. So, for example, if in times when fast horses were the best way of moving communication, it would take 10 days to inform the capital city that your army has lost the battle. Right? Today, you can SMS, we are losing the battle. So you can send fortification, you might change the course of battle. So many events in history would not have occurred if communication had been faster. Admiral Nelson, Trafalgar Square, you see that big statue of his, right? His death was not known for many days. I mean, the Armada would not have lost had they known that he was dead. The course of history would have changed. We would have all have been speaking Spanish. So the point I'm trying to say is that had people known that the admiral has fallen, if a reel, 1 minute reel was available to everyone to see him dying in his last minute and he posing for the reel, because that's important. Before you go, let me do one last reel, right? So had we had information, we would have seen a different course of events occur through history, even in our case. Time and space had a relationship. Distance meant moderation of information, meant less people were intimate to that event. But because all of us saw the second plane hitting the towers for 9/11 on our TV screens, it became our war. If suppose broadcast media was not present, if CNN was not present, none of us had seen that happening in real time, we had only read about it a week later or 10 days later in a magazine, Newsweek or something else, would we all have supported the war on terror of George Bush? But because we saw the second plane, and of course in the replay we saw the first plane hitting 25 times. Sorry, I get too emotional sometimes. So, even that tries out. The machine tries out. Stop. Okay. But the point I'm trying to make here is that because of these specialized time, everything is up close and personal, irrespective of where it happens in the world. And we all are emotionally moved to defend irrational and sometimes rational decisions because of that proximity of us, third-sea technology. And he was talking about broadcast media. In digital, it is on steroids. The despecialization of time, the death of time, I call it the death of time, is something which is a feature of technology. So everything that is happening in the world is personal and emotional. And that's very important when it comes to the policy space. And what this all does is basically diminishes democracy. Now, if everything in the world is personal and emotional and proximate, then how do you prioritize policy making? If you have $100 to spend and everything is urgent and immediate and we need to grievance and riots and mobilizations, where do you deploy the $100? Where is the space for strategic or tactical decision making? So first, paralysis of leadership flows from the proximity of the grievances that occur. And this is very important. We are less able to take decisions in spite of more information precisely because of more information arriving at us at a speed that overwhelms us. So there is a very interesting book and you must all read it. It's by Samuel Huntington again, Political Order in Changing Societies, where he speaks about breaking points of institutions and societies when change happens too quickly. And I would argue the digital age is a period of time when change is happening so fast that traditional families, communities, institutions, governments, parliaments, and of course constitutions cannot keep pace with the rate of change that is underway today. And we have to be mindful of this. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to say that we want solutions coming out of it. That how do we ensure and protect institutional capabilities, leadership decision making, and of course rational response at a time when everything is so personal, so immediate, so proximate. And of course, alongside the political order and its being shaken by the changes that are taking place, we also have Benedict Anderson spoke about imagined communities, the imagined nation. Many of us are also living in those imagined communities and imagined nations, and we are actually sometimes overestimating the real nation, and therefore we expect our government to be able to respond to everything. We see Americans do this, so we want Indian government to also do this. Both have different competence, different capabilities, different abilities, and yet because we see in some other place a cause and a reaction, we want that to also follow suit in our own geographies. So there is a very interesting sociological relationship that is unfolding between us and our countries, us and our communities, us and our localities. And this is possibly why we see what we see today, which is the mass and hyper polarizations that are literally prevalent in every society. This is not an American phenomena or a UK phenomena or an Indian phenomena. This is secularly spread across the world. We are seeing polarizations because A, we are creating silos for us here, like I mentioned earlier. B, we have affinity to those far away rather than to those who live next to us. You would not have met your neighbor, but you chat with a person 10,000 miles away every day on your various chat platforms. And see the dysfunctionality because of the overwhelming nature of change which is underway, the mobilizations that are possible, and whether it's the land law, whether it is farm laws, whether it is climate action by Greta Thunberg, whether it's the Women's March. Some are positive mobilizations, some are mobilizations to challenge incumbency, some are to change laws. Whatever be the reason, the speed and the scale at which we can mobilize and we can pose questions to those who are in positions of power leads to dysfunctionality of decision. And governments around the world are struggling to cope with this phenomenon. And again, I've given you some names of folks that you should read. I think Frenemies is a book you must see, how social media polarizes America. But this is true for literally every society. It's an interesting book to read. You also have The Uncivil Agreement, how politics became our identity. Everyone is political today. It's true. An individual, as it was famously said, is the smallest political unit. And today we are loud, small political units. Everyone is a political unit. Everyone has an amplifier. Your mobile phone. So we are a loud political unit. 1.4 billion people is a lot of political parties, but in India, not even 2 people can agree. So when they say how many political parties does India have, I said last count 1.4 billion. Everyone has a political view on what should be done. But it's an interesting phenomenon. Just think about it. The hype machine. Hype Machine is again a very interesting book on how sensational, rhetorical, and false information outruns facts and truth. So just read, I mean, just some food for thought for all of you. And finally, you don't hold the phone holds you. You must understand that. We have passed that stage when phone was a device. Yeah, the phone feeds off you. You are the fuel that keeps the digital world alive. You are the feedstock, you are data. You also obey them. Remember I told you about who you date, what you eat, what you wear, how you travel, where you go to. They decide. So today the tail is wagging the dog. The medium is no longer the message. The medium is the agent. It was famously said by McLuhan, I think, that the medium is the message. No, the medium is not the message. Medium is the actor. Your behavior is the message. And it's very interesting how technology has changed us, or is changing us, shaping us, taming us, training us, whatever you want to call it. Finally, let me try and close with this so that we can have some time for Q&A. Why should we be interested? Right? Why should this matter to us? Because fundamentally, when we decided to live as people, as communities, as citizens in a nation, in a state, in a village, in a city, it was to serve some basic human needs. Now, Maslow many years ago described those needs, but he did not make this pyramid. This pyramid is created much later. We use it, but this is not his creation. He never did this. It was far more boring the way he described it. This is far more exciting the way you see it. And therefore, perhaps we lose the nuance in his work when we use it in this manner. But admitting that I'm guilty of that, the fact was that when we signed a contract to elect a government or to appoint a government or to select a government, whatever may have been the process, we expected the government to cater to our basic requirements of security, safety, bijli, sadak, pani, food, electricity, water, maybe now even internet, and maybe some other things that we need. We expected the state to ensure the availability and access of citizens to these provisions. Municipalities, local governments, national governments, whoever may be the person responsible, there was a certain role for the state. The role for the state of safety and the physiological needs was very clear. That governments who would not provide these would lose the next elections or would become unpopular or would be removed. It was very clear. Bijli Sadak Pani used to be the campaign for many parties in previous times. Today it has been privatized. Today private sector provides many of these needs. And you can't vote them out. Should we have accountable boardrooms? Should boardrooms that provide utilities to people, should they be elected? It's a question. I'm just being provocative here. I'm not thinking they should. We have a few business people here. I don't want to say and suggest that I want to change the ownership. All I'm saying is how do you make boardrooms more responsive to citizens when they are the providers and provisioners of utilities and essential services? And if digital access and digital medium is now going to be a utility, should tech platforms and tech boardrooms be accountable to people? Should we be electing Mark Zuckerberg's successor, for example? Just a question. I'm not saying we should. Because the human needs today, from the first two, which used to be the responsibility of the government, safety and physiological, to love, belonging, which used to be more family and society, to self-esteem, which was a factor of all of them, to self-actualization, which was when you wanted to go to the Himalayas and complete the rest of the term. Different forces were responsible for shaping different needs of yours. The state or those in charge of running cities and countries were responsible for a few of them. The private sector and others came into the field as well. And then, of course, there were personal and private spaces. That was generally the division. Today, if you see the Maslow hierarchy of needs, it's privately determined, privately offered, privately provisioned. And none of them are accountable to citizens. You do not elect them, you cannot vote them out. They are working towards a bottom line, and you are going to help them meet. So, should this social compact be revised and rethought? The social contract that we keep talking about, is it time for a new social contract in the digital age? Is it time to rethink the roles and responsibilities of the private sector, of the individual, of the state, and of the citizens? And that's something that we should be thinking about. So, we must intervene because of these following reasons. I'm closing here. Because data is oil, it is currency, it is consciousness, and it is community. Our sanctity as a society is dependent on how we respond to what is happening in the digital world. How do we govern it? How do we regulate it? How do we prevent the harms? How do we catalyze the goods? Because there is tremendous good that is happening as well, and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Right? There are some examples. DPI is one of them, where we are trying to create public infrastructure that benefits all rather than create profits only for a few. And of course, the GDPR by the EU to take the data ownership back to its people was again muscular. By the way, nearly all data regimes around the world have an element of GDPR in it, so including ours. Ours is probably more forward now, more forward looking, but certainly this is something we should be thinking about. And I leave this here for all of you to think about as I close this presentation. Thank you for your time.
Really excellent presentation. So I'm going to moderate the Q&A, and we'll have a roaming mic here. I'll request you to identify yourself and keep your questions brief and pointed. Uh, Towards the end, he said that data is currency, data is the new oil, currency, consciousness, and development and community. So I must tell you all that the first big global conference, that T20, that is the component of G20, which was hosted by his organization, and the theme was data for development. In fact, that was about a year ago, right? It's a very important conference which was held. I'm sure some papers and material will come out of it. Towards the end, he also said GDPR, right? That used to stand for German Democratic People's Republic. He is Germany, but so we'll reclaim. So we are open now, Mr. Siddharth Shiroli.
Yeah, so being an optimist, uh, like they say, the muddy water cleans itself. So two of my observations is that A, almost since it's been more than a decade that all these things have started impacting us, I kind of started getting those withdrawal symptoms that, how it impacts us. So we automatically start to withdraw. A, is that happening with most of them, or will it still take time? A, and secondly, uh, is there a good side to it? Like supposedly, I don't know, small change that I noticed is that on my phone, earlier it used to be WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Nowadays, you just change your mindset, income notes, reminders, Google Calendar, and you can use it more productively. So it's just these two, three thoughts that I'm experiencing. So I just have I can just bounce off.
So I completely agree with you. I think all of us over time will be able to reset our relationship with our devices. Many of us can't. There are millions of cases of digital addiction, and some of them have deleterious consequences, from joining bad groups leading to bad action to sometimes even self-harm. So we have seen digital addiction becoming a serious challenge for us. But you are right. Many of us reset our relationship with our devices. But it doesn't mean that we switch off from the digital. Our choices are still being determined by others around us who are still influenced by the same information. So in many ways, while our random distance from our devices is going to make us believe that we have removed ourselves from the net, people around us are still online, and their discussions are still shaped by WhatsApp University, as someone said actually. Right? So my point here is that yes, we can do it. but I think we need awareness. The problem here is that by the time we talk to students, they are already in Gokhale. And they have been on Instagram for the last 5 years. They have already made up their mind before they came to Gokhale about how the world is, where their position in the world is, what their politics is, and what they're going to work for. My idea, and here is my proposition for Pune, which is one of the forward-looking cities, that why don't we take this conversation down to schools? And at 12-year-old age and 13-year-old age, as people first go to smartphones and go online, maybe even 10 years of age, and because husband and wife are both working and busy, they give their devices even earlier. But I think uh, digital harm, cyber hygiene, digital safety, and using it wisely and smartly has to be ingrained at a much earlier age. Otherwise, we are getting dysfunctional teenagers and young people into our system. They have already decided what the world is. I think there is an opportunity. If we are able to do this, we get a very evolved citizen by the time they turn 18. If we do it right, because of the information and knowledge that they gain in those same 5 to 6 years without courtesy these devices, we can also use that as a positive opportunity. Being a young nation, we should see that in that way. That we have an opportunity here to create world-class citizen participation by involving them in certain digital civics lessons at a very young age. In our school, we used to have a civics book. When I was studying civics के lessons होते थे. We now need digital civics lessons on how you, which websites you access, how do you verify what is true, how do you, what certain things you don't do, certain things you do, certain precautions you take, certain things you don't post. I think we need a digital civics class. So that's on your first one. I think it is retrievable, but the whole reason of being slightly more provocative here is to start making us think about some of the actions. On the second part, look, the, these are really exciting times for tech and countries like us who are going to grow in the digital age. We are not going to grow through cheap manufacturing. We are going to grow in an age where it's going to be smart manufacturing, 3D manufacturing, and services. Right? India's journey from $2,500 per capita to $10,000 per capita is going to be tech-induced, digitally fueled, and platform-based. We are going to be the largest beneficiaries of this age. So we have greater stake in regulating, governing, and managing this ecosystem than anyone else. The rest can switch off. They have had $50,000 per capita income. They can play golf and go fishing, and their pension funds and pension plans will take them. We have to grow. So we have to take the lead in shaping this agenda. I don't know if that answers the question.
Sorry, us non-students are capitalizing the discussion here, but first of all, thank you for a fascinating talk. You spoke about this. Absolutely. So you spoke about this 2,500 to 10,000. Let me try to bring this back to this concept of India, Bharat. Uh, Digital is, let's say, what is seen by the group here versus digital. What is it? You spoke about the 2,500 famous figure. But the concern in a lot of is that our median still remains 1100 or 1200 somewhere thereabouts. So where we are talking about the GDP going up, our real challenge remains that those who are at the median level are still around 1100. It's an abysmally low figure. And the challenge is how do you bring this digital knowledge to all of these people? I interplay this with something which we face as industry, which is the lack of availability of people. Single biggest challenge for India is we keep saying there is unemployment, but on the other side, there is no unemployment because if you speak to almost everybody, they will tell you they cannot get people. There was a recent statement of L&T that they need 30,000 masons. Very simple. We, as a country, somewhere failed completely in getting this to actually standardize. I'm taking this back to your thought of saying everybody should be doing something different. Not at all levels. We are one country where we are not educating the vast majority of people where the jobs are needed. Masons, the plumbers, the carpenters, which make good living. A, digital inclusion in some ways hasn't reached them for education, for whatever reason. Number two, there is no standardization there. Everybody is trying to do it their own way. We are one country where you still cannot get a carpenter's toolkit. You go to a shop and say, give me a carpenter's toolkit. You go to a shop and say, give me a plumber's toolkit. You won't get one. I'm trying to link all of these things to say, how do you use what you've said as a country to go back and change and find our typical India model? Because what works in the West will not work for us. We are a country which is 1.4 billion. Our challenges are different. For the group which is sitting here, yes, Instagram is
Yeah,
important, the
also,
relationships are, but how do you get employment to get going?
look, I think the short answer is everything that you say is true, and in many ways is a challenge that we all have to respond to. But my talk was not necessarily focusing on that. It was focusing on the larger politics that is emerging out of it. But I'll still try to give you an answer which is not related to the presentation, but the question that you've asked. Look, there are two answers to this. First, we must recognize, and this is important for all of us to know, there are more people without a smartphone than with a smartphone in this world. So when you see 5 people on the train, 4 of them on the mobile phone and one not, the 1% is the majority, not the minority. The 4 people are the lesser number of folks in the world today. So we are a dual speed world. Forget about India, we are a dual speed world. It is more acute in a country like India. That duality is more acute in a country like India because he mentioned the median. The median is clearly not having access to the digital provision and services that the elite, if I may use the word elite, although many of us may disagree with that description. Now, there are two things that are happening at the same time. There is so this is again a concept. One is called, and you must know this concept. There are two kinds of humans on this world, in this world today. One are called somewhere people. The ones without the smartphone still live in the real world. Their locality matters, where they exist, who they trade with, what education is available, what health facilities are available is based on the geography because they can't access the world through their smartphones. They are called the somewhere people. Their destiny and the future is linked to that location. The other group of people is called the anywhere people. They can be comfortable anywhere in the world. They are going to be in the same community, same hashtag, same platforms, anywhere. Policy making is becoming more complex because every government has to cater to the somewhere people as well as the anywhere people. So what you said is a truism. It can be restated many times. But the challenge, policy challenge here is that how do you allow the anywhere people to create wealth and create redistribution that can reach the somewhere people. Wealth creation is not that. But using that wealth and not redistributing it to benefit the somewhere people, I think is going to be a luxury that nations like India cannot. We have to have a very different value creation framework, unlike the west coast of America. We will have to make sure that the digital values that we create actually first bring those who have been left behind into the mainstream, but we continue to serve in creating skills, creating real world employability, so that they can be the 30,000 people that L&T is today finding difficult to recruit. So we will have to continue to build the 20th century legacy projects that are still incomplete, even as we build a 21st century economy that is going to give us lots of chances of value creation. So there will have to be a dual track approach.
Thank you, Dr. Saran, for such a fascinating lecture. My name is Ritik and I'm a research analyst with the Gokhale Initiative. My question is regarding your last part of your presentation on the governance of technology. So, in that sort of sense, now that India's DEPA framework has been in practice for almost 3 to 4 years now, and it is one that is inclusive of the public, the private, and the individual. Uh, while its use cases now are currently more financial in nature, in order to challenge the earlier ideas that you spoke about in your presentation of all being in one. Yeah. So how would you see that as a model being inclusive and being able to be applied in other geographies of the world? That's it. Thank you.
Can I take bunch of them together? Go ahead.
So, Santosh here from Master Students in Economics. So, my question is when you talk about one side countries, nation states, and other side a digital world that we're having, and rule based for here could be a constitution or the rules that we get. And here you can see even GDPR or rules that we have are more of rules. Whereas also the nation states also have some value systems like justice, equality. So there are some fundamental democracy, fundamental values that define the nation state. Similarly, in a digital space, what are the values that is coming up, or how do you look at that? Because the rules are more into protecting the data, etc. But as such, when they are they are playing the role of a national state there, and what are the values and how should they function?
So you look, on the governance. Sorry, there's student in the back.
Hi, Manoj here. Yeah, Manoj Bochet here. I have a question on the similar line. You talked about how we make boardroom more answerable to the people and the governance. On the similar line, it is two-way sword, right? So because we have seen the licensing raj and the over governance, how does it work? So if they are more answerable to the people, they are answerable to the nations also, right? The nation who holds the car. So how does we make sure that it does not goes into the restriction mode, and it is answerable, but it is also the free, because we talk about the free world, free economy. So that thin line.
Good question. Yeah, we can take one more. Maybe the lady in the back there. There are two ladies at the back. We just do that. See, the good thing with taking questions is that questions are guaranteed, answers are not.
Please keep your question brief and go ahead. Yeah, and introduce yourself.
Good evening, sir. My name is Mehar Saxena, and I'm a PGPFE student here. So my question is, in this technological borderless civilization, will a nation which conforms to its whims thrive, or a nation which rigidly rejects its thrive? So is there a balance which we can find for a nation to conform?
Hello, sir. My name is Yukantara. I had a question. There was a question that you had mentioned in one of your PPT slides. It said, "How do newer generations perceive needs?" So my question was surrounding that thought. The newer generations, it is observed that whenever we buy something, we tend to focus more on the quality of experience that we get, rather than the amount of money that we need to pay. So we don't mind paying more if the quality of experience that we will get is high enough. So, sir, what is your opinion regarding this mindset shift?
Listen, I agree with the new generation. Okay, generally, I agree with you. I don't want to be cancelled by you. So I generally agree with anything the young people say it right. I say you are right. We start with that. Okay, so let me try and respond to the questions. Let me first start with the conception of governance. I think very quickly. Someone once asked me from a developing country, I won't name the country or the minister. They asked me, you have provided UPI, you have provided digital identity, Aadhaar, to folks at $1, to 1 billion people at $1. This should be sent everywhere. I said that's actually not true. The cost of provision may be $1, but the civil society architecture, the judicial framework, the court cases, privacy as a fundamental right that emanated from some of those debates was a institutional architecture that had billions of dollars invested into it. So countries without that kind of civil society activism, academic thinking, research papers that flowed out, and judiciary that could examine and come up with certain frameworks to make digital IDs consistent with constitutional values, as someone used the word values, is impossible. So technology is political, and every time you export it, it has to be in a context, and therefore, nations in the past. And let me give you a simple example. When Frame 6 machines were exported to power plants to use them and run them, we used to do capacity building for the people who would use them and run them. Similarly, technology has to have a similar framework, that you cannot export technology without the capacity and competence being exported alongside it over a period of time. Otherwise, it can be disruptive. Technologies can be disruptive if they are in hands of folks who are not necessarily cognizant of the implications of potential implications of the use. And I think that's something that we need to think about. Governance has to flow with technology. Today, the problem is that technology is invented in the West Coast, which does not believe in tech governance at all. It is cowboy capitalism. It's a libertarian system, and technology is still romanticized as this great leap forward. Regulation happens in Europe, which doesn't understand innovation. So the gap between Europe and America is so vast that we have badly governed tech frameworks. So Europe is the regulatory capital, America is the innovation capital. One doesn't understand regulation, one doesn't understand innovation. So third countries like us will have to perhaps come up with a middle path. I think that's on values. Look, values over time become interest, interest become norms, norms become laws. So I am someone who truly believes that values and laws are a continuum. They are not different. People of certain value agree to a certain framework within which they will exist. So they reflect. So when someone says Europe is value based, no, it is interest based. It suits their interest. They now give it the garb of values. We can also have our own interests, which we should use. This is an Indian value. We have to have coal power plants. Absurdity. I'm just trying to tell you the absurdity that I will not allow you. I'll keep you poor. It's a European value. So let's be honest here. They are all interests which are cloaked in different nomenclature, but they are highly interest based. Now, on freedom and license launch, absolutely right. And therefore, modern day governance cannot be through legislation. You cannot make technology safe by legislating it. You have to make it by competence, skills, and investment in coders and other institutions that can keep up with innovation. So we have to become technological. Our governance is through having know-how and capabilities rather than through legislation and laws. You can't wish away or you can't legislate away digital harm. It's not going to disappear. Now, so your question was that are nations that impose themselves going to succeed or those who are agile? I think agile nations will succeed. Being rigid is not good for any age and certainly not the digital age. We will have to be nimble, seize opportunities, adapt ourselves. For example, this evangelical rejection of decentralized finance could lead to India losing out an opportunity, but also the embrace of digital finance without thinking through could lead to the chit fund at steroids. The chit fund schemes that used to happen, the lottery schemes that used to happen on steroids. So we have to be nimble and agile, and of course savvy and smart. So rigid nations don't work. I have answered your question. Oh, yeah. So listen, I answered that question. I agree with you. Look, on your needs framework, I agree with, because you have to rule the digital world. You have to govern it. You have to regulate it. It is you who will decide the need-based architecture. We were born in the 20th century, where our television channel used to have Sunday movies only. Right? Chitrahar also.
So we'll take about 3 or 4 more questions. We're running out of time. So I'm sorry, with so many hands, I have to be the Asian inspector, the Inspector Raj. So we'll take that gentleman in black, with this black t-shirt, this lady, and this lady in pink. So Baki, sorry, try to wrap up. Yeah, please keep your questions very brief, please.
Hello, my name is Rishikesh. I'm a lawyer. My question was this: in last point, you mentioned that there be another social contract between the tech giants and.
Can there be a social
So
contract?
I have a little bit more to say.
No, only one question. Yeah, that black t-shirt.
Good evening, sir. I'm Ishan from PSC. And my question is, sir, do you draw parallels between Marx's alienation theory from 1844 with respect to individuals and technologies? A, and B, do you see technology?
You can't smuggle 2 questions in one.
Sorry.
Marxist alienation. Yeah, the lady.
Sir, you talked of cancel culture. I only wanted to ask, how do you think the dynamics of social punishment would change in the digital era? As like cancellation is a form of social ostracization and a punitive measure to breaking social order. So, how do you think punishment and crime would change in the digital age?
So social contract, Marxist alienation, cancel culture, and last question from the lady in violet. Sorry, we are running out of time, so we need to respect. Use the mic.
Good evening, sir. My name is Mukta. I'm a master's in law student at National Law University. I have a question from legal approach, which is like we know right now how the United Nations or any international level organizations are working. So, based on all the topics that were covered, how do we approach and how do we make all the nations come at the same table? Because we know how digital giants have different approaches towards each and every nation. For example, like third world approaches or first world approaches.
I understood your question. Let me quickly respond to you and then we'll go to the website. I think international organization is important, but not necessarily the only route. If you see, there are already attempts by like-minded countries to look at regulating certain kind of technologies that are emerging. For example, the Global Partnership on AI, where 11 odd countries have created a group where they're looking at regulating AI. You also had the GGE at the UN itself, where certain number of the governmental group of experts, where certain countries were invited to think about critical infrastructure protection and other norms of behavior in cyberspace, etc. So you've had different formats attempt to come up with some global standards, global rules, global norms, perhaps even international law to manage this space. It's not necessarily been successful because a that the nature of technology lends itself to extrajudicial action. It is not attributable. It is you are neither able to attribute who has done it, neither are you able to find a court of jurisdiction which has powers over that particular action, and nor do you have platforms that necessarily take the responsibility for what transpires on their particular domain. So they all say we are intermediaries, we are not subject to any scrutiny in terms of what happens on our sides. So we are in a complicated space. I suggest the best way forward would be for bodies like the G20, perhaps even smaller than them, to come up with frameworks that we will do digital business with those who adhere to these 10 commandments of the digital age. It is time to come up with some 10 commandments of the digital age and make it a necessary precondition for people to participate with you in the digital space. And if big countries can come up with that, they could have an effect of shaping digital futures in all countries. So if you can get 80% of the digital world onto that frame, the rest 20% will follow, although there will be close to 100 nations in those balance 20%. I think that's the way to go forward. UN is not the competent body to do this, simply because UN respects the nation state. We want a signatory to also be Microsoft and Facebook and the big tech giants who have more power in this space than technology companies. The global partnerships actually look at private sector as well. Sorry. So what could be the new social contract? Look, the new social contract has. Let me give you two short, fast ideas. If your mobile phone is your workspace, and if everyone is working for a big corporation from their mobile phones, perhaps you never even met each other, and you're not colleagues. You don't occupy the same space. You don't meet each other face to face. How are you going to have collective bargaining with your employer? What happens to the conception of unions that we used to have, that used to protect the rights, minimum standard wages, health protection, life insurance? Collective bargaining has changed completely. So we have to have a new norm for being able to negotiate with those who employ you. So the private sector and individual relationship will have to change and account for distance workspaces, work from home, and digital norms. So that is one way. So think about social protection in the digital age will require a nuance where governments, private sector, and the individual will have to create a safety triangle. How do those three interact to provide social protection? That's one way of thinking about it. The second way is that what should be the norms of safe behavior by corporations themselves, and that needs to change. And we have a live example when we were all dying of the pandemic. Even then, the vaccine manufacturers had to do 3 trials before we allowed the vaccine to be injected into our arms. And even then, I believe it was a little hurried. But still, there were 3 trials that they had to undergo. Today, we allow technology into the markets without trials. So I think one way of thinking about it, sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes, where a technology is first tested in a smaller group, then at city scale, and then finally allowed at commercial level. So again, I think the Factories Act that used to govern safe factory spaces or the rule of factory owners will have to now have a digital avatar, and how innovation and innovative companies need to be managed, and the relationship with citizenship and citizen protection will have to be rethought. So I'm just giving you 2 ideas, but there's lots we need to do to sign a new social contract on paychecks, protection, and purpose. And purpose is most important. Just giving paychecks and protection is not enough. If you don't give purpose to individuals, we will lose the self-actualization that we were talking about. They will join the ISIS. That is why you had people from Europe joining ISIS, because ISIS was giving them purpose. Universal basic income was giving them their paychecks. So you had this phenomenon, and at scale, this can be really dangerous. Sorry, Marxists love tech, yeah. And they alienate people also. That is part of cancel culture. So, and by the way, so I know your question is slightly different. Now, I think in some sense the aggregation and building up of communities where the individual is subsumed.
Let me just take, sorry, I'll take half a minute intervention. I think what he meant is that the Marxist theory was when you commodify your job, the job is split into smaller steps and all. So the worker gets alienated from the production process, and that's the famous thing of alienation. In the digital age, also people are feeling more and more alienated.
So that theory works in the digital age at scale. But listen, there is a contradiction here. So yes, you are not only now becoming distant from the product, but in fact you are also the product. So for the first time, the raw material is human, the refinery is human, and the output is human. So for the first, it's a very interesting phenomenon that you are not only a part of the production value chain, but you are also a part of the product itself. And here you are commoditized twice over. So in that sense, that not only are you now doing bits of the value production, but you are also priced for that being a bit in that value production. I mean, I can't explain it in a short time, but it's an interesting phenomenon.
In fact, my mother used to ask me, "तो ये NDTV बात देख रहे हैं, तो NDTV क्या बेच रही है? NDTV आपको बेच रही है."
आपको बेच रही है. So is cancel culture the digital punishment? I lost my phone. I was without my phone for 2 days. I was without my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for 3 or 4 days because they needed two-factor authentication. I had lost my phone number. I was in a foreign country. I couldn't even access my email. I was in terrible shape, man. That was like solitary confinement. I felt like Papillon, that book, if anyone has read it. I felt I was in this desolate cave, locked up, away from civilization. But let me tell you, we had there are incidents when now judges, in certain instances of cyber misbehavior, are actually forcing people to stay away from the digital. They have been given punishments that say you cannot use mobile phones or you cannot join a digital medium or you cannot participate in digital conversations. So that is one part of it. But the second part of it is that when actually you are by folks in the middle ostracized and removed from digital societies. And that is the second part, where you are actually excluded, like we used to have exclusions in the real world. Many class-based, caste-based, religion-based, we had exclusions, right? Today, digital exclusions of a new kind are now flourishing.
I think she means blocking and bullying on
What I meant was ostracization as social punishment has existed through history.
Correct.
It's not new.
No.
So it is only being shifted
No, the digital, that happens.
So, but it is an indication that we can do punishment to crime differently. As in, there is a new approach we can take, which the digital era can provide. Do you think there is a way to change punishment because we have newer technology, or do you think punishment?
But I did mention that it's already happening. That there are already cases where this has been applied. It's already happened. In fact, by the way, folks who misuse certain platforms, even the private providers block you from using that platform. You're actually blocked if you misbehave on certain platforms, right? Facebook, Instagram, etc. If you do things, they actually block you. They block your account. They block your ability to use it anymore. So I know people on Twitter crying that you block me from Twitter, right? Twitter does it all the time. They remove you from the platform.
So I think this has been a very fascinating presentation and conversation. We can go on and on, but we have to respect the constraints of time. However, as using my privilege as the moderator, I do want to ask one last question and keep your answer very brief, if open-ended. It came in one of your slides. We are drowning in lies, and we are drowning in fake news. I mean, it's a tsunami. It's worse than a tsunami, and it's not just it's everywhere, all over the world. So, is there a magic bullet out of this?
Ajit, I have thought about this a lot. The natural answer should be that eventually all of us will have to recreate some digital editorship. Eventually, newspapers and all had to have editors simply because we needed credibility of information that was being relayed to. We'll have to create a new group of experts whose job is curation. Now, the problem here is
Mediate in your back.
correct. The problem here is exactly that. The minute you create a curator, then you are actually going into a silo, and you are actually being fed a certain class and kind of information your way. So the challenge is this: that how do you enable access to information which is wide ranging and yet which is credible? And I don't think anyone has cracked that puzzle yet. We see polarizations and silos in all platforms. But whoever does invent this has a billion-dollar unicorn waiting. If we can actually create a way of giving integrity and credibility, even as we give wide-ranging information access to people, I think that's the business model some of you must try to make. I think Facebook is over if you can create that fair book in its place.
There's a huge market waiting for a product or market for truth. Market. So we're going to really now conclude, but I do want to, first of all, we'll give you 2 rounds of applause. So please, and as a small token.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a really interesting and insightful session. Now, we'd like to extend a token of appreciation to our guest of honor. First, I request Mr. Samir Saran to please accept our token of appreciation. Now, I request Mr. Siddharth Shirole to please come forward and accept this token of appreciation. Now I request Mr. Sudhir Mehta to please come forward and accept the token of appreciation. Now I request Mr. Suhail Sharma, DCP Zone 3 of Pune Police, to please come forward. Mr. Manoj Kochar, please come forward to receive the appreciation. So now as we come to the end of this session, I would like to just say 2-3 lines which I have heard from my grandma many times, and I think some of you must have heard at your home. So she told me that यूनान मिस्र रोम सब मिट गए जहाँ से अब तक मगर बाकी नामो निशान हमारा कुछ तो बात है हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी सारे जहाँ से अच्छा हिंदुस्तान हमारा.